All right, hello everyone. This is part two of the MAC PFD event on coaching in the health professions. I am delighted to introduce three of our panelists and a speaker that was in part one. That doesn't need too much introduction, but Dr. Robin Mackin is the speaker that just finished, and she just gave us a tour de force of basically the literature around med ed specifically, but health professions coaching. Is definitely a hot topic right now. So we're hoping that we can kind of spread the interest and maybe along the way we can inspire other people to follow suit with some of their own literature and such. So thank you so much for that great review, Robin. And for those of you who are watching online later, you can check out that video. It should be just right above and you can watch that part first. And so what I'd like to do now is actually invite these three wonderful people to join Robin on the dais. So I'll ask them all to turn on their video and for us to actually have a chat and a panel discussion about their perspectives on coaching, because all of them have a coaching or mentorship story to tell, and I'm going to let them tell it, but I'm delighted to just introduce them in order. So I'm going to do it the order that you can see on the screen right now, and I'm going to ask Robin to stop screen share in a second, but what I'll do is I'll first introduce Dr. Liliana Coman, and Liliana is in the School of Rehab, and she is just an awesome person. She was trying to step down from things, and the rest of the team were like, can you please come help us and get this team started? And she came out of the woodwork to help us, because this was something that she's so passionate about. So she's definitely an expert in coaching and mentorship, and we're so excited to have her here representing obviously a whole school right now, but no pressure. And we really love having all of our various healthcare professionals for the different schools actually represented. So thank you so much for joining us. The next is Dr. Mark McRae. Some of you may know him. He'll tell his story himself, but some of you may know him from not just being a doctor, but maybe being a hockey player at some point. And so Mark is a rock star surgeon now, and I don't know actually if he plays any musical instruments, so maybe a superstar surgeon now, and he works at St. Joseph's Healthcare as a plastic surgeon. And so he and his actually twin brother, who I get confused with on the phone sometimes, both work there, and it's very confusing for some of us who work clinically to refer to Mark and his brother. But I think they just like basically sorted it on the back end when they figure out who was on call. So that's great. And last but not least is the captain of our coaching team, our coach of the coaches, I guess is the way I would put it, Dr. Jonel Miklea, or some people call him John. I guess I get confused sometimes, but he told me the story behind that, and he is someone who is in the Department of Family Medicine, and he has been doing a lot of deep diving into coaching and where it belongs in our profession. So he's done some special training and brings to us that wealth and wisdom and a really awesome perspective on that. So thank you so much to everyone, and have each one of you kind of give your 5-10 minute spiel, and then we're going to open it up to questions. And definitely as you're being inspired, maybe you already have some questions from Robin's talk that you've just been watching, but I'd love to have all of you consider what questions you have for this panel of awesome people, and you can type them in the chat. You can also ask them later, but definitely go ahead and think about those questions and type them down. But I'll see Lily on the floor, so if you want to, Dr. Coman, if you would be so kind.
I just want to say thank you for the introduction, but I'm no expert in coaching. I am passionate about mentorship in higher education, and that's because of where I am, and because of having students for having had students for 20 some odd years, getting close to retirement, as you said. What I want to say is each of us, I'm sure, can identify a person or perhaps several people who have influenced how we approach our professional and academic life. Sometimes they are teachers, employers, friends. What they always have in common is developing a relationship in which they use their own experience to help us achieve our own goals. They share their personal experiences and informally transmit knowledge that they gain over the years to us who are less experienced, so that we may grow and mature as individuals. This is a relationship in which personal development is the key outcome. Um, is comparing with coaching, in mentorship, a successful mentorship is transformative for both parties, though the primary focus is on the mentee. I was listening attentively to Robin's talk, and I saw that slide where the role of mentor was, over or crossing with the role of teacher and the role of the coach. And I realized that there are traits in the coaching role that are common, but there are also differences. And listening to that football coach or soccer coach, was it soccer? I'm not, the last video that you showed, Robin, he did say that he would like to have, or was looking for or seeking a mentor for his coaching role. So while the areas are sometimes blurry, and or the differences are not that clear, there are common areas for both mentors and coaches. One thing that I want to say about mentoring is that the latest literature is on mentorship in the academia, is exploring the role of the mentor as a teacher, a sponsor, and a collaborator. And so by the literature describes that a mentor would share skills and knowledge that might matter for scientific work and for succeeding in scientific community, such as scientific writing, publication process, etc. As a sponsor, a mentor acts as a broker between the mentee and the scientific community, and facilitate the mentee's integration by enhancing their visibility and providing opportunities for exchange with the community. So this, in the end, strengthens the mentee so-called social capital, um, meaning social ties and networks the mentee can access, which makes the mentee more attractive to be hired as a faculty. And the collaborator, the role of mentee, the mentor as a collaborator, is the active integration of the mentee into the mentor's own projects. Um, it's um, it's it's an opportunity for the mentee to acquire what they call a human capital by working together in joint projects with the mentor and the mentor's colleagues, and opening doors for social capital as well. So there's this paper from 2020 actually, where um, they looked at the roles of the mentors, and um, it's Ayala et al. In 2019, actually. They conducted a semi-structured interview at Johns Hopkins University and concluded that sponsorship, in addition to mentorship, is critical for successful career advancement. So they looked at sponsorship as different than mentorship, whereas other authors look at sponsorship being part of the mentor's role. Um, the paper that I was talking about from 2020 has identified the fact that the mentee's perception of the mentor being the sponsor as well as a teacher actually increases their ultimate outcome, which is being hired as a professor in a higher education. The collaboration part of the mentor's role was not as important, or was not perceived by the mentees as important as the mentor being the sponsor and the teacher. So I think that the mentoring is in a way similar to coaching, but it's also different. And I found this, and I don't know if you, Robin, agreed to this. A coach has some great questions for your answers. A mentor has some great answers for your questions.
Okay, great. That's a great ending line. And so I know that some people have to head off for dinner and feed the kids and stuff like that. So obviously we will have this online shortly, and I'll be editing that part out when we go online. But the next, I'd like to invite Mark to kind of take the stage and go ahead and kind of like share us your story. And definitely, I think that this is a way forward for us to think about how we get away from the crap sandwich, or some people, I guess someone has written the McMaster sandwich. I'm not sure it's the McMaster one. It came preceded us for sure. But 100% we got to think about how we change the nomenclature and our approaches. So maybe Mark, can you take us through your personal experience, and then maybe if you have any suggestions on how to avoid that sandwich altogether, that'd be great.
Yeah, I can certainly speak to, my perspective is from in the surgical realm is where I am, but I think all this coaching really does apply across the profession. So it's really, I think there are some insights that we can kind of glean from my experience. But, again, I think going back to, why coaching is important, Robin did a great job with that. And, I think it's, I love the parallels with sports. I love them. I think they're excellent. I always think back to the like golfing, for example. Like we all, at least people that golf occasionally, like myself, will once in a while go golfing with somebody that golfs every day, right? And then you go out there with them, and it turns out that they're almost as bad as I am, right? So and you say, okay, how could that possibly be? This couldn't possibly happen. Like you are out here, 5 days a week. And it goes right back to that work by Anders Ericsson that talks about how 10,000 swings at the club won't make you an expert, won't make you a great golfer. But if you do have that deliberate practice, so you have that in between those strokes, you have somebody maybe saying how you can tweak that stroke. You have a coach that can help you at least be reflective on what it is that needs to change, because you yourself can't see that. Right. So it speaks to that large blind spot that we all have. And again, there's where that coach can really step in and really be effective for us. So I think everybody can kind of get behind the idea of a coach and get behind the idea that, yes, in medicine, we need this. And in all the health professions, yes, we see how this could be valuable for us. Now speaking from my perspective as a plastic surgeon, and with the faculty of plastic surgeons in their division. And when we start talking about this new thing called coaching, everybody, you get a range of looks and expressions, but I think one of them is, we got this. This is what we're coaches, of course, and a procedural specialty like plastic surgery with a lot of one-on-one interactions, this is, of course, this is what I'm doing. So I think a challenge for me and for everyone, I think, is how can we enhance those coaching interactions? How can we enhance those feedback that's being given without necessarily having extra degrees in coaching? And I think, from our perspective, I think just making sure some of these conversations happen is a big step. There's ways to systematically change things, like, say, your evaluation forms, using different tools that are available to make sure that even within the evaluations that the person receives at the end of their interactions has built into it those opportunity for focused feedback, actionable items, reflection. So that's the one perspective which I think is helpful, and I think it really can be built into whatever program you're in. And I think you can, just looking at any of the steps from the curriculum itself to the assessment steps, you can find ways to build coaching into your programs. The other side of things is, yes, it's a very procedural specialty. So that's the one side of coaching that everybody sees. And that's, where the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons talk about this coaching in the moment versus coaching over time. And so that's the coaching in the moment side of things, which we all recognize. Again, that the coaching over time, and I guess this is where things start to kind of veer towards mentorship, and in other areas there's different hats that can be worn. I think that we are also trying to kind of establish that within our division as well, and I think that can be more of a longitudinal relationship. And it can take on different structures as well. That's also, I think, a big challenge to try to find the systems in order to and bring up the capacity of the individuals that are going to be doing that coaching as well. So I think there's another skill set there, which is somewhat different, right, than the one-on-one situation. So I don't want to speak for too long here, but I think that's all just kind of food for thought for people. And we can discuss any of those or go further on any of those questions. I loved Robin's slide about some of the differences that we're performing. Like we're player coaches. We're not just there kind of observing within the medical field, within the medical profession. So yeah, great talk, and I'll be here to discuss if anybody have any questions, folks. I mean, that's great.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Mark, for your perspective. And Jonel, we're going to get you to tell us there, Dr. Miklea, what you're thinking. What are you thinking?
Thank you, Robin, for bringing all those dimensions to coaching, some of which I've never heard or thought of them. It was amazing. I really enjoyed it. Both you and Liliana alluded to the coaching-coachee relationship, which is basically the key of an effective coaching session or effective feedback. So I think the power lies in the strength in this relationship. So I'll use the Educational Alliance to illustrate a bit how can this work in our clinical coaching in our clinics, coaching our trainees, and how I experienced it. So Telio is a psychiatrist and an educator at UBC, and he proposed to use the therapeutic alliance from psychotherapy to form this educational alliance with our learners. So I personally experienced this. A few years back, I had a resident who was assigned to my practice for a 2-year residency in family medicine. I thought initially I had a very reasonable educational alliance with her because we were both former IMGs. We both were refugees to Canada. So I thought we had some things in common. Later on, I realized that she had a very different approach to my patients. She was not very patient-centered. She was rather paternalistic. And aside from that, she was condescending at times. And her view of her family medicine training was to basically not get exposed to bread and butter of family medicine and see the whole spectrum. She was not interested in doing obstetrics, doing prenatal, seeing newborns. She preferred to just do internal medicine and geriatrics because her career path for the future was a very narrow practice for involving just the care of the elderly. So not too late in her training, the Friday evening, I was away on vacation. And as her clinical supervisor, I wasn't around. She knew I was away. And she was supervised by one of my colleagues. She had a refugee family from Syria booked as her last patient on Friday afternoon. This family was about 20 minutes late because they had to change 2 buses to get to our clinic. And once they arrived late, she refused to see them. The preceptor, my colleague who supervised her, asked her to see them. It turned out one of the kids was so sick that it required to get admitted to the peds ward, had to be sent to emerge. Anyway, she called me that night, very late on my cell, and she was crying over her experience. So the key components of this educational alliance are 3. The learners believe that there is a mutual understanding of the purpose or the goal of this relationship. The learners believe that there is an agreement about how to reach that goal and what are the actions required to reach that goal. And the third, equally important, is the learners liking of the preceptor and the belief that these things are mutual. So all these key elements of the educational alliance are geared towards changing the knowledge, self-concept, and behavior, which are the major elements of the coaching and effective feedback. So in this relationship with my resident, we haven't met the first 2 key elements. She completely had different goals that were not even compatible with the residency program in family medicine. And also, she did not view herself as a service provider. She had this paternalistic approach to the patient. So philosophically, we were not on the same page. The only thing we had a bit of was this preceptor's credibility. She viewed me as one of somewhat credible clinical preceptors. So this is the only part that we had in this educational alliance. And I think this example illustrates how our boundaries were completely not crossed. She called me when I was away on vacation, but I never set boundaries with her. So this was my issue. So therefore, in coaching and feedback, I think it may be useful to use the principle of the therapeutic alliance in psychotherapy. We all use that with our patients. We are all familiar with those principles. And this way we can form a strong educational alliance with our learners and strengthen this sort of clinical preceptor-trainee relation. I wonder, what are your experiences forming those educational alliances, and what were the positive aspects you observed, and what are your negative aspects you observed of those educational alliances? This was my story.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question to reflect on. I really like how all of you have really kind of been forcing me to think so hard about what it is that I do and how I do it, and then think about how I got to why I do my stuff. I mean, it's probably fairly stereotypical, but I have Asian parents because I'm Asian myself. And there are some stereotypes in that culture around how you're given feedback, often in high volume and somewhat critically. And so I think I probably have a lot of that cultural background that I bring into the clinical space. And so I joke about with my trainees now, I kind of preface by explaining, I sometimes have a reputation for being a tiger teacher, but as Jonel has pointed out, I often explain to them the rationale behind it, because I want you to be the best person you could be, the best physician, the best PA, the best whatever, whoever I'm supervising, on day one when you're out on your own, because we have so much time. And that usually, I think, really helps build that rapport, even with someone who I usually have a learner for like one shift maybe. I don't have them for 6 months. Like that'd be that'd be a dream, but I don't have that. So I usually supervise people a very short period of time. So just like all the rest of my clinical care, I have 5 seconds to gain rapport, and then I have to move on. So definitely, I think that Educational Alliance, it can take years to build, and it might only take 5 seconds to find a couple of hacks to bring that into your practice. So I definitely think that that's something that we can consider. Robin, I might ask you to, I know you've kind of given a big spiel earlier, but do you have any thoughts from your being a freshly graduated trainee, and from your point of view, I might ask you to kind of shed some light on that perspective of how coaching is affected you, and where you think there are some opportunities for all of us to take home when we're thinking about the trainee's perspective.
Yeah, so I think the reason, I guess, if I give some background about why, obviously people think I care about coaching because of where I came from it in sports, but I actually care a lot more about it in medicine, because I think I actually went through a lot of reactions when coaching was sort of announced. I was really enthusiastic initially because I thought coaching was going to be the same as how I had experienced it as an athlete. And so, of course, if that was integral to my success of an athlete, then once coaching comes to medicine, it's going to be the same thing. It's going to be fantastic. But then I started seeing how like academic supervisors all of a sudden got relabeled as an academic coach, but fundamentally we still had the same relationship. And again, that whole idea of, was this feedback or was this coaching? And so I think one of the important things that like I emphasize when I talk about this is not that we need coaching to look like it does in medicine, and not that coaches need to have that same role, but that in fact the expectations need to be clear. Because as the person receiving the coaching, if my perception is that I'm going to be coached like I was as an athlete, or what I interpret that to be, it can actually be quite frustrating. But as I think Justine had pointed out, the reality of especially people that are working on wards with multiple learners might be that the opportunity to observe and balancing all those other roles and those hats, which came out in a lot of the articles, makes that a very different dynamic. It's not the sole role of our educators to just coach us. So I don't think that the expectation should be that coaching in medicine should be the same as coaching in sports. But I think what we should expect as learners is just to have a better sense of what that vision is and to be part of those conversations. So instead of just flipping roles that we already have to meet accreditation standards or Royal College standards, but to really have these discussions to decide exactly what should that look like, and what is our vision, and what is really the difference in the relationship. As someone who just recently graduated, I often reflect, a lot of the times I was just excited to be hitting the 4s and 5s because that means that I otherwise was meeting what I needed to meet. But then in fact, as I got more senior and I realized that it was almost like, okay, you've met where you needed to meet. You only really got support or extra one-on-one coaching if you weren't meeting sort of the average standards, that you almost got jealous of the people that sort of weren't meeting those sort of standards, because they kind of got this individual attention to push them to a different level. And so I often reflect, I graduated the type of clinician that I am, but could I have actually been much better had I had some more one-on-one coaching? And what would that look like, and how would we fit that in? And I think in the realm of really busy specialties and things like that, what I think we can learn from the family medicine is actually using video a little bit more. Even as an athlete, to actually watch yourself do something while someone walks through and tells you exactly what's going on, or working through it with you, is very different than someone just telling me, you didn't drag your back leg. And I would be like, yeah, I did. I'm sure I did. Like, I always do that. But then you watch it on video and it's like, oh God, I really didn't do that. And that's what that looks like. And I think in medicine, the same sort of thing. If we can use video, especially when we don't have the opportunity to observe, and we can get around the patient confidentiality and the safety for patients, it probably lends itself to some really valuable experiences, even if it might just be one opportunity to be observed through videos, to sit down and have that coaching. So I think we need to come up with creative ways to do that when we think the stipulations and the other responsibilities of our clinical teachers is that they have all these split roles. So I think a lot of the future might be a little bit of video, and how do we incorporate that so that we can actually help when we're not in the OR with our preceptor one-on-one, but we're actually seeing 7-8 patients a day, and we're kind of all over the place. So that's sort of my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, that's really cool. So I'm gonna give a couple of reflections now, just because I have that prerogative as moderator. But first of all, I wanted to read into record Justine's first question, because I think you mentioned Justine, and Justine is one of our attendees today. But for posterity's sake, I'm gonna read her question. So Justine, who's one of the MacPFD enthusiasts who are helping us with developing all our content, I'm really glad that she could be here. And she basically commented and asked a question. So I'm gonna read the comment for the record. So a big difference between sports and musician coaches versus clinical coaches is that clinicians are usually doing coaching. A pitcher doesn't usually have to train a new pitcher while they're pitching the game. The biggest problem with a dual role is limited time for observation, analysis, and feedback, right? And you're kind of like exactly explaining that that's maybe where video might have a role. You somehow have to do all this while you're seeing your full caseload. Any tips and resources to assist? So I think, Robin, you're exactly pointing out that video. And I know that Jonel in the McMaster Family Practice, they have this capability in all of the McMaster Family Practice settings. So maybe I'll ask you to comment on that. I think in Mark, I don't know if you're doing any surgical replay stuff, but I know that people that do laparoscopy and things like that, they'll often, and endoscopies, I know that some of the proceduralists do use video replay to say, oh, and right there, that's where you should not have lacerated liver. And this is what you could do next time if you don't want to do that. Or, like there might be near misses as well. You could debrief if it's not actually something that is super bad. So that's like definitely something that we can incorporate in our practice. And I think there's actually a pretty cool opportunity in the future as we do more virtual patient care, is that if some of those virtual patient care encounters are recorded, if you are using Zoom Healthcare and you are storing some stuff confidentially in a good way, you might be able to actually review some of that kind of encounter with people. So I definitely think that those are some options that I'll reflect. Jonel, can you tell us a little bit about what exactly it is that you guys have at MFP? Because it might be good for other clinicians to think about installing. I've been very impressed by how involved they are.
So in the MFP and Stonechurch are the two academic practices in Hamilton, and in some of our distant sites as well, but not all the community practices. We have the ability to record interactions with the patients in every room that the residents are using. So they are picking the cases they want to record. Usually if they have a challenging case, we might remind them this is going to be a good case to record, or a drug-seeking patient, or a just difficult patient that's known to challenge the resident. And what they do is they also have behavioral science. Behavioral science and mental health replaces the psychiatry rotation in family medicine residency. So it's of the curriculum in behavioral science, they are required to bring couple tapes and just get exposed, basically play some tapes to the group, and then have their interactions critiqued by their peers, by the psychiatrist who is facilitating this session, and social worker.
Wow, that's like really cool. So like, not only are you looking at having coaching now, it's almost like peer coaching mentorship blurred all together, because you're getting, I mean, I don't know how many here on the webinar right now have ever had something called micro teaching, when you're doing teaching and then you actually get filmed doing teaching, and then someone takes you through the play-by-play of what they thought of you teaching. And it's very intense, but it can be very, very useful, because you're like, oh, I say every fourth word. And even if it isn't for your clinical care, you might want to consider folding some of that kind of stuff into your practice. I've been watching my webinars because I have to cut them and edit them, and I'm like, wow, I need to stop saying yeah all the time, because I was saying that a lot. So these are the things that I've replaced my yeahs with ums, and that's not much better, but anyway, I'm still working on it, right? And so having deliberate strategies that what you can do, I think those are great. Another question is, how do you integrate self-directed learning with feedback and actionable items? Do other types of coaches ask questions to get students to think about the actionable items, or do they just tell them, or what's your experience? So Mark, maybe I'll ask you to give that question a go, because you've been a pro athlete. So how did your coaches get you to know what to do?
So I think there is within that there is the issue of accountability, right? So I think somehow being able to circle back and address, whatever those goals are, is an important thing. So I think as we're kind of developing these coaching programs, say within my division, again, some kind of form, some sort of form of document, some sort of form of agreement that can come out of some of those meetings that can be circled back to at a later date, I think is incredibly valuable, because it does allows that accountability to happen. And again, I think the other aspect is, the importance of reflection, the importance of having, time and resources to work on the things that you discuss. But I think that accountability is a key piece.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think that a big part of it is by asking them to kind of declare out loud, it's a step towards the right direction. Because if they are not mindful about what exactly it is that they're experiencing, that can be a huge barrier, right? Liliana, I guess you had a question, which is awesome. Is that something you want me to get everyone to kind of comment on, or we'll come back to you last, maybe? And thanks for posting that paper as well. I'll put it in the show notes down below, but when we post this. But I think that this is a great question, so I might just ask everyone, and I might start with Robin because she started us off tonight. But if she's available, it looks like she might have stepped away. Actually, why don't we go to Now, oh, there she is. She's back. Okay.
Yes, yes.
So, Robin, maybe can I just ask you the question of what do you think are the challenges for establishing a culture of coaching and mentorship in healthcare? I think that's a very good question to ask, and maybe just one thing that you think we could all do, because I think we can just do one round of take-home points from everybody, and then we'll end the recording and then maybe mill it up for a little bit because you guys are too awesome.
So one thing that we can do as preceptors to help
Or
the
yeah,
culture.
or it can be systematic. It can be anything. Like, what can we do to change and establish the culture of coaching and mentorship?
So I think it's working towards that goal of being safe to be vulnerable. So whether that's addressing the hidden curriculum, whether that's actually going all the way back to admissions and making sure that we're actually bringing in learners that are coachable. I think that's a big part of it. And so, we've definitely introduced a station that is very much just dedicated to how coachable a learner is going to be, because at the end of the day, you don't really care how strong they are clinically. You're always going to be able to get a learner where you need them to be if they're coachable. So I think from a systematic standpoint, that looking really at how do we adopt people that can reflect, who can be coachable, will allow us to create a culture where people are okay with being vulnerable and recognize that, again, failure is part of growing, and to adopt that mindset, as opposed to always thinking that you have to be told that you're doing well in order to actually feel safe.
Yeah, I might add to that one thing, which is that sometimes it's about unlearning the previous culture, right? Because if you think about how we all got to places, like, most people are coming in, it's their maybe second degree sometimes, like regardless of which health profession. Like, a lot of people don't arrive at the professions right away, unfortunately, anymore. Or maybe they're coming at it from a high school, highly competitive environment, and they're just clawing their way in, right? And so now it's all about achievement until that point, and then now they're in. How do you change that culture? How do you create a systemic way to unlearn some of these bad habits of achievement so that people can be vulnerable and actually be part of that? And that's definitely a great challenge for us to all think about. So I think that is definitely something we should think about. I think admissions could be part of it. It could be part of the unlearning that we do, and orientation for our programs so that people are more acceptable. I think everyone should just watch Brene Brown's Netflix special. That would probably solve a lot of it. She has something called Daring Greatly. She has a TED Talk, a Netflix special, and a book. And it's just wonderful. It makes you cry the entire time. But there's lots of people that have found that's a big kind of like stepping stone towards us thinking about that culture and psychological safety, as Amy Edmondson talks about. Right? So we're going to go to Liliana next. You did ask a question, but I'm going to ask it back to you, I guess.
Yeah, I think there are challenges and there are opportunities. I think one of the challenge could be the resources, time and resources, right? So you may experience, coach fatigue if you're asking so many people to be coaches.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's just a matter of lack of skills.
Mm-hmm.
So, maybe we need more people trained and participate in, trainings that are talking about coaching and mentoring, to entice clinicians to become coaches and mentors, or mentors in the academia. I was reading about artificial intelligence as an opportunity for coaching and mentoring. Mostly, I think it was for coaching and mentoring.
Mm.
I think Saber, it's called, had a coaching bot,
Mm-hmm.
BOT.
Mm-hmm.
Quite an interesting, quite interesting, exploring artificial intelligence and how we can
Yeah.
use it in this. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. If the point of a coach is to get you to reflect and then make an action plan, does it have to be a real person? That's a great question. Wow, we're really forward future facing there. But I mean, the bots are there. Sometimes when you're like DMing across, like you think you're talking to a person, but it's just a bot. And there's our Twitter bots all over there taking over the internet. Definitely, really cool innovation idea. But I do actually see there being a role for especially people in practice, right? So faculty and people who are actually clinicians in practice, that might be psychologically safer, because they might not feel like they can tell a colleague that they're not doing something well, right? And there are
Yeah.
really cool innovations around CBT and things like that. They're using this as an application for our patients. So with cognitive behavioral therapy and things like that, there are apps that do that function. So yeah, you're right. How can we do that? That'd be amazing.
Yeah, you're talking about psychological safety, and actually that was considered one of the challenges for implementing or establishing a culture of coaching and mentorship in healthcare, was lack of psychological safety. Yeah.
And with that, we're going to go to our surgeon for his thought on this.
Yeah, I mean, I
I
think
think that's huge,
yeah,
right? Like
pretty much.
psychological safety is huge
Yeah,
in ORs and stuff too, right?
I think so, and I think it really does get back just to what Robin was saying. I feel like I'm reiterating what she's saying, but the challenge is to really, after we've invested so much into our careers, into getting to where we are and who we are, we get some of this feedback, we get some of this coaching, and our backs get up, and because there's a fundamental threat to who we are, to our identity. So to be able to switch that from that, again, that fixed identity, that what we have and who we are, and to be able to change that to more of a growth mentality, and that really at every level. And that's a fundamental cultural shift, I think, for all of us, right? And I think just being aware of that through your training. I know that the residents now, when they're coming in, are getting much more knowledge, and they're being trained in this much more. And I think that that's one way of doing it, through medicine, but again, in all the other health professions as well. So
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's Carol Dweck's work on my growth mindset, right? She has that book, Mindset. She also has a TED Talk. I think all the authors that I love have TED Talks usually. I don't know if that's a correlation or causation, but I think that when you're a good communicator, you can do it in a book, you can do it on stage. Like people are just better at. Those are the kind of people I gravitate towards, right? But I think that's the secret, is thinking about how when you fail at something, it's not because you're a failure, but rather you failed at that thing, right? Like just because Michael Jordan one time didn't hit a basketball shot, it doesn't mean that he's not the greatest like basketball player possibly of all time, right? Some people can fight me over that, but let's be honest, like after the Netflix special, I'm sold that he is that awesome. And so like I think that we have to think about how we disentangle one particular incident where we weren't at our best from our personal self-worth. And I think that that's the thing we wrestle with the fixed versus growth mindset. So thanks for bringing that up, because I think that's a really great point. And Jonel, our captain, the coach of coaches, I guess, our mentor.
It's a compliment, but I cannot take that title. So
it's okay. It rotates every couple of years, so you can hand it over when you're done being team lead.
I'll pass it to Robin now. But I think it's in a trust, like in sports. I think in medical education too, it's in a trust that our learners have in us. Yeah. So I think we need to build on that trust, develop it. I have the luxury of the longitudinal relationships with my learners who are 2 years with me. And I think we all do some sort of coaching in medicine. All of us were involved in teaching at any level in healthcare. It's just now we use more this term of coaching, and that's kind of creating a bit of intimidation. But I think we can use it. We can say effective feedback. We have given effective feedback to our learners all along. Yeah. So, and a bit of maybe faculty developments like the one today may help us learn about ways to do it and sort of psychological frameworks how to do it. But I think we're all doing it. It's not different than what we do on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think that's really empowering, that it doesn't always have to be that you have to have all the answers. Thinking about the coach rather than being the mentor, the teacher on the pedestal and being perfect, that also helps us as clinicians admit where we might not know everything, right? Like I think as a coach, you can say, hey, I'll look that up. As a mentor or someone's like, sage on the stage, you might feel like you have to have the answer. And I think that's like an interesting dichotomy that you can think about. And it looks like Justine had one more question, and Jonel's a little frozen right now. So I'm just going to take a moment here and kind of like highlight, actually, knowledge translate a piece of work that I've been working on, a paper that I just posted in the chat. But this is a framework that we kind of came up with after talking to bedside teachers in the emergency department to ask about like how they perceive their roles in the emerge. And what's interesting is that coaching did come up in the end. It was more of a combinatory role, but it's kind of that tension that we were all talking about, right? Justine's kind of brought it up in the comments, but Liliana's hinted at it, Raron's hinted at it, Mark's hinted at it. And I think that we've all kind of hit on the fact that we have multiple roles whenever we're in the clinical space, when we're teachers that are practicing while teaching. Some of us in the Faculty of Health Sciences might have the luxury of teaching more in the classroom, for instance, or more in a research environment, but often even in research, you have a blurred role. But in the clinical space, you definitely do, because if you're there as a clinician supervisor, you are there because you're taking care of that patient actually, right? And so you are a patient protector. You are also an assessor, because increasingly we're asking people to provide feedback and write down what they saw. And that creates kind of like this sometimes a helicoptering effect if you're kind of like looking over someone's shoulder. And we talk about helicopter parents, but you can have helicopter attendings as well, I think, who kind of like lurk and are assessing and are doing QI, and they're protecting the patients, and they're just making sure that first year resident asks the right question. I'm sure we're all going to be doing it tomorrow in the emergency department because it's July 1st, and that's what we're going to do, right? And then there are times when you have to like look at the synergy between teacher and assessor. And that's where I think some of the coaching comes in, right? Because without assessment, without judgment, you really can't get them to the next step. And so I think that there's one of the ways where some of our bedside teachers were thinking about how they merge those roles. They saw it as a way to kind of informally give some feedback so the person could get better, but they were teaching them with that intent in mind. And so that's why we kind of thought it was a little bit of a combo. And then there was the last one, which is like the idea that sometimes teachers have to be hands-on, and sometimes, I'm sure Mark's done it in OR, that they might just literally take their gloved hand and put it on yours to guide you through a stitch. And I think we've all been there where we've had to walk someone through, okay, this is how we do a physical exam maneuver, or this is how we might do something procedurally. And I think that that's definitely something that we can do. Or sometimes it's show and tell on how you take a history during something that's really high pressure, or something that's more complicated. And so I think having that, and when we're at the nexus of all that, no wonder we're all confused, right? We're trying to balance so many roles at once. We have 3 hats on our head and they're all falling off, right? Like, and this is where I think having some conversations about what we're doing today really kind of clarifies some of that. So hopefully that's useful as a paradigm to kind of like help people think. The link is posted below, and for those who are watching the video, but for everyone else, it's in the chat box. So you can go ahead and you can also save the chat if you are on the webinar right now. You can live save the chat so you can keep it for later with all the other references. So All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for spending the time with us today. I think this is a really important topic. I know that a lot of people couldn't make it tonight, and we've got some RSVPs saying, "Oh, 5 o'clock, I can't make it. I got to feed the kids," kind of thing. So definitely, I think there'll be lots of interest when we get goes online. So thank you so much for participating, and those of you who are able to come in person, we're really excited that you did, and thank you so much for showing up.